saying they're dishonest, but they are misguided, believe they're already doing this. No one's spending their days teaching, saying, you know what, I'm going to teach to this level. We've all taught to the level that we believe we can only get kids to. And I think this is a challenge to us to think about it a little bit differently, because I think it puts an argument that it's actually increasing rigor and mastery is the way we're going to get them to these levels, instead of keep lowering and hope that they get there. And I think this is a pretty key leverage point, so watch this one closely if you would.
The more difficult level of students, how do you engage them? I think you hear the statement sometimes, you can lead a horse to water. We're talking about kids and wanting to get engaged, and how do you get a kid to really want to think? How do you get them to want to work towards that mastery level? And you hear it, sometimes I've heard a teacher or two in my life, I'm not even said it myself, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. But this idea is you can make that horse really thirsty. You can make that horse so thirsty that when it gets there, it wants to drink. And that's the idea, that we don't just do this in isolation by making things more complex and harder for kids. We actually create the conditions for the kids who want to engage in these conversations at higher levels of thinking and learning. A couple of the supports that we have in our district is that, again, we have priority standards. But here's the key point I want to make about the priority standards here, is we've all gone through that process of unwrapping those priority standards, right? The key with that is to tease out those levels of expectations for student mastery, right? That we identify those key concepts and skills, those verbs in blooms, and identifies, okay, this is the level of rigor we're expecting. If we all just shared common standards, again, there's no indication that the outcomes would even be similar. If we didn't then talk about what are the verbs, what are the things kids need to do to demonstrate. And let's get on the same page about that to make sure that we're doing this kind of good work. Love Shay's point to the fact that no teacher thinks they're teaching to the bottom tier. So we have to help redefine what that looks like. In addition to the 18 students who have met every single credit they need to graduate but still can't pass a minimum competency, I also think about system-wide the kids who need all that remedial work when they get to college. 50 to 70% of our students can't take just regular college-level reading and writing, math and writing courses because our bar is set too low. So how do we change that? And I think this is one good example of that. And again, we have done some work around that by selecting priority standards and unwrapping those. And if nothing else, maybe reinvigorating, okay, that's why those things are so important, and be able to speak to those. In our evaluation system, again, there's hopefully new and continued conversations. I've heard great conversations between administrators and teachers happening, and teachers being encouraged, new ideas about increasing rigor, and our evaluation speaks directly to that, and the mini observation speaks directly to that as well. And then lastly, we're trying to create time. Like, we get that this takes tons of time, that it doesn't just happen overnight. So what support resource we have in our School Improvement Wednesdays is huge. As we move into next year, thinking about how are we going to lead on these components in our district around redefining rigor in our classrooms. And collectively as a team, now that we kind of know what School Improvement Wednesdays mean and what they might look like, to as a group of professionals come together and say, okay, what can we do to help make this happen? What resources can we collectively create to ensure that rigor is increasing in our classrooms? That's another support that we have, and a key one not to overlook. Actually, I try to put that on every single one. I'm going to finish up here with the last one pretty quickly here, but it's an important one, is that the last piece to proficiency-based system assessment is meaningful and drives student learning. So the assessment is meaningful part is exactly that it connects to that level of rigor we just talked about. That assessment doesn't mean a lot if it isn't at the level of the outcome we expect kids to meet. Right? So if our assessments are here, but we're expecting kids to get here, they're not aligned. And so this next presentation is just a continuation on that health analogy really quickly, and how those levels of assessments need to drive student outcomes. And I do think, too, that in our system, teachers believe that they are assessing to mastery levels. And we need to begin to change that conversation. So I think this analogy can kind of help paint a picture for how we can have some of those conversations. So I just want to continue on with the health analogy here quickly. Obviously a doctor and a patient and a teacher and a student, same type analogy, but a doctor has a lot of assessments that they do. And there's a couple things they need to be. They need to be super accurate, right? And they need to be thorough and in-depth enough to ensure they know what the real problem is, even if it's something the eye can't see on the outside, right? If I come to the doctor's office and I got a big gash on my arm, the doctor can obviously see and evaluate that. But sometimes we go to the doctor and we look fine, but internally there's something wrong. With our students, the same thing is often the case. Sometimes there's some obvious things that stick out to us that this kid needs some help in this area, and we need to have an assessment to measure that. But there's also things that kind of slip through the cracks you might not notice right away, that a kid might be struggling with something internally in their skill set that's going to be a huge hindrance for them along the way. So one type of assessment tool that a doctor might use is a thermometer. And I'm going to relate this to the classroom and the different types of assessments we do. And I want you to think about what kinds of assessments do you mostly see happening when you walk through classrooms, just to kind of have a gauge. So a doctor might use a thermometer. Again, it might just give an indication of whether or not a patient's sick, but doesn't give the details of what the problem really is. In our world, we see a lot of that in a lot of the worksheets that we give, right? It's kind of just a thermometer. Do they generally know what's going on or not? Just basic. But can't really diagnose specific problems in the learning. Just fill in the blank, draw an arrow. They couldn't know it if the words weren't in front of them, but since they're right there, I can tell you, here's the vocabulary words with all the definitions. I can match those. But if I were to sit down and have a conversation with Drew, could I actually use those vocabulary words in a conversation? Never. Another level of assessment that a doctor might use a stethoscope to go beyond the surface level, to begin to listen to the lungs and heart and see what might be going on inside. And in the academic world, comparison might be a multiple choice type test, where it's still somewhat at the data recall level. I haven't actually asked the kids to do something with the learning, but a little bit more complex and asking kids to do more with their thinking. The reason why I put multiple choice up on there is because it's kind of a controversial one when you actually have rubber meets the road conversation with teachers, and we talk about creating quality assessments, and they all just want to make a multiple choice out of the back of the book, and oh, this is going to cover this, and this is the easiest, and here's what I've always done, and here's the multiple choice. Multiple choice tests aren't bad, but if we think back to the beginning of the presentation about giving specific feedback to learning, do they really help kids know what they have learned and what they haven't, with those clear, measurable objectives? But they're not wasted, but they're not necessarily the levels we're wanting. The doctor then can, if there's something else going on, the doctor can use an x-ray to get to that deeper level of assessment on the health of a patient. In the same way, as teachers ask kids to perform what they know and apply their learning, we get to that deeper level of assessment. We can really start saying, okay, yeah, you could do it on this worksheet, you could bubble in the answer on the multiple choice, but when I actually to write it, okay, you really don't need to know it to the level I need you to know it. Because if we're asking kids to master concepts and skills and teach towards mastery, means being able to do something with what they know. So our assessments need to measure if they can do it. And ultimately, there's an MRI. The point there being that in an MRI you can see the detailed intricacies of how things are working. Where something might have gone wrong. I almost think of it like as an MRI, as almost like a GPS, an internal GPS that can see, okay, here's where these things went wrong, and here's the issue, and as a result, here's what we're going to do to intervene. This is pretty serious. When we ask kids to perform fully what they know, apply their learning in a new situation, a new environment, it can give that kind of feedback to us as educators as we assess our students.